Abelisaurs are easily one of the more interesting groups of theropod dinosaurs. Though they don't stretch our definition of a theropod quite as much as therizinosaurs, oviraptorosaurs, or birds, they twist what one might consider normal for a theropod into a highly unusual form, evolved to suit the animals for a very specific niche. The evolution of these square-skulled, chicken-armed, big-chinned beasts has always been a little muddled. It's known they are derived from ceratosaur theropods, but exactly how they went from comparatively normal theropods to the sausages on legs we know them as is a mystery. That is, until now. The transition between the very latest Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods is a good chunk of a couple tens of millions of years, which register as a big black void. It was a mysterious period in which the largest animals to ever walk the land were changing. The hypothesis that the giant sauropods of the late Jurassic disappeared into oblivion is now considered inaccurate. Certain groups of sauropods made it through the Cretaceous, like the diplodocids and dicryosaurs. Some groups related to the brachiosaurs just became larger. There's a high chance that the largest dinosaurs to ever live actually appeared during the Cretaceous period. How they got from brachiosaurs to titanosaurs is the tricky business. Due to serendipity, luck, or chance, the rocks of South America preserve many firsts in evolution. Some of the first dinosaurs to appear have been uncovered in South America, like Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor. Early titanosaurs are also found here. 2011 saw the description of one such early titanosaur, Tapuyasaurus. This medium-sized sauropod wasn't particularly unusual. It didn't have long spines sprouting from its neck. It didn't have an abnormally long neck or thick, robust forelimbs. What makes the find of Tapuyasaurus so important was its skull. Sauropod skulls are very rarely found. Big, giant, air sac-filled animals easily break apart after death. The skulls of these airbag titans were made of dozens of small bones, which easily disintegrated into dust. As important a find as Tapuyasaurus is, another remarkable animal was to be found underneath it. Literally. Abelisaurs were some of the most successful theropods throughout the southern hemisphere. In many places they were the top dog, with giant-sized species like Carnotaurus, Echrizonatosaurus, and Spectrovenator. In other places, they were joined by the bigger Allosaurians Carcharodontosaurus, Giganotosaurus, and Mapusaurus. When we place the two groups side by side, their differences become quite clear. The abelisaurs unanimously share the characteristics of short, tiny arms, rough, rugose skulls, and heavily built frames. Some, like Carnotaurus and Majungasaurus, developed horn-like projections of bone from the top of their skulls. Others, like Rugops and Echrizonatosaurus, had ridges of rough, textured bone on the edges of their skull. A recent discovery adds another data point to the family tree of these theropods, and provides a new piece to help unravel the mystery of their evolution. Meet Spectrovenator ragei, Rage's ghost hunter. Not much information is out there on the actual discovery of the beast, but its bones were found literally right below the rather complete skeleton of Tapuyasaurus. The skeleton of Spectrovenator was excavated in one big block. A little bit of it was partly prepared in the field, and then some of it in the lab. CT scans were made of the skull when it was prepared and separated from the skeleton. Spectrovenator is extraordinarily complete, with the whole skull, lower jaw, and the first set of neck vertebrae intact. After that charismatic beginning, the specimen also preserved the pelvic region, with the last chunk of dorsal vertebrae, pelvis, and first chunk of tail vertebrae. Both legs were found, as well as a chunk from near the end of the tail. Did you know that many animals, including us, have bones within our throats called hyoids? Hyoids are helpful as a structural support for our tongues and voice boxes. They're very delicate bones and are rarely preserved, but Spectrovenator has them. Altogether, one of the most complete skeletons you could ever hope for. Spectrovenator's skull is the real showstopper. It looks like the real-world inspiration for Roland Emmerich's Godzilla in name only from 1998. Aside from the Jay Leno chin, this newly described abelisaurid certainly fits the bill of giant ugly lizard. This skull is the first definitive skull of an abelisaurid from the early Cretaceous. Thankfully, it's also super complete. It's missing only 1 or 2 bones, and is a little warped, but overall a handsome specimen. As you can see, it's relatively short and deep. This isn't the pointed sinuous snout of a velociraptorine, nor the wavy crooked snout of a spinosaur. The teeth are tightly packed and slightly recurved, but change only in size from the tip of the snout to the back of the jaws. The bones are caked in a rough texture, which is scientifically referred to as a rugosity. The more rugose a bone is, the more likely it was a canvas for harder materials to latch onto. In the case of better-known, more advanced abelisaurs, like Carnotaurus and Majungasaurus, the rugose patterns probably attached to hard keratin armor on the face. Since Spectrovenator was more primitive, it didn't have nearly as much rough, bumpy bone. It was restricted to the top and the margins of the skull. Both Spectrovenator and Tapuyasaurus come from a layer of rock called the Quirico Formation. The Quirico Formation is made up of fine sediments which likely represent a lacustrine, or river, environment. The only other fossils found in this area are from fish. It may be thanks to the body of Tapuyasaurus that the body of Spectrovenator was preserved at all. It's unclear if Spectrovenator got moved underneath the sauropod after death, or if it died from being crushed by the long neck. The Quirico Formation has been dated to the early Cretaceous period, specifically Barremian or Aptian stages, making it anywhere from 129 to 113 million years old. All of this occurs in the Coricao de Jesus municipality in northern Minas Gerais state, Brazil. The early Cretaceous is part of an obscure period in the history of abelisaurid evolution. Known fossil remains from this time include mostly tattered and fragmentary remains. Many of these fragmentary remains, such as Eoabelisaurus, have been found to belong to abelisauroids, a much more primitive grouping. Spectrovenator comes after these forebears. It would make sense for an animal which places more primitively in its family tree to have features which are general to the group as a whole. Since Spectrovenator occupies a place between species which aren't true abelisaurids and the advanced true abelisaurids, it hosts a combination of features. It lacks the upturned snout which you see in Carnotaurus and close relatives. The skull of Spectrovenator is more of a rectangle shape, with the skull and jaws angled along a single plane, similar to other generic theropods. However, its skull is definitely getting blunter. What looks like big saggy cheekbones are a series of 3 bones: the jugal, the quadratojugal, and the quadrate. These bones would have stuck down from the skull, overlapping the lower jaw, and may have provided the animal a strong bite. As you can see here, the authors instructed the skeletal artist to reconstruct the animal's arms. The arms weren't found, so they are speculative here. That being said, it's a good inference since they got progressively smaller and less practical over their group's evolution. Later forms couldn't bend the arm at the elbow, and many reduced the forearm to a nub of bone. A more primitive form, such as Spectrovenator, probably had arms which could bend, but were still quite small. Authors of the paper describing Spectrovenator place it as a sister to the group which gave rise to the rest of the abelisaurid tree. Spectrovenator nests most closely with Rugops of Niger. You can kind of see it in their more stretched out skulls, overall smoothness of the skulls, and small display areas of rugose bone around the margins of the skull. As a consequence of the longer jaws, tightly packed teeth, and primitive position in its family, Spectrovenator was probably far more general in its feeding habits than its descendants and cousins. As time progressed, the abelisaurs developed larger body sizes, smaller arms, longer, more agile legs, and shorter upturned skulls. All of this has been hypothesized as specialization towards fast-moving animals with quick strikes and strong bites. Spectrovenator wouldn't have been like this. Though it may have had a stronger bite than contemporary theropods of its size, it was not nearly as much as later abelisaurids. This would mean they probably stuck to smaller prey items which weren't speed racers. That's about it for this find. I just had to make a video on its bizarre super angular noggin. Make sure you like this video and share it around. Leave a comment if you like, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon too if you want to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching. Pledge to my Patreon at any tier you like, for a slew of many delicious offerings. Special thanks to patrons Dinosaur, Nattycat, Ed Peretz, Steve Bradshaw, Thea Svensson, Dana Manchester, Aphid Kirby, and Antron.